There are fates in the grim darkness of the far future that are far worse than death, and among them none is more tragic, more revered, and more horrifying than the existence of a dreadnought. Imagine the final moments of a warrior's life, shredded flesh and broken bone, their body ruined beyond any hope of natural healing. Imagine that death itself comes close enough to taste and then is denied. Instead of silence, the warrior wakes again, bound within a sarcophagus of iron, flesh entombed forever inside a colossal war machine. There is no sunrise for them anymore, no laughter, no release from pain, only endless war. Their body becomes a prison, their soul a weapon, and though they may stride across the battlefield as living legends, inside their hollowed shell they endure the quiet eternal torment of memory and machine. Call to action. The battlefield stank of ash and promethium. Even through the filters of his helm, brother Captain Luther could taste the air bitter and hot, every breath thick with smoke. His bolter roared, each round tearing through the silhouettes of heretics that swarmed like insects across the ruins of the Manufactorum. For hours he had fought without falter, his blade slick with ichor, his armor dented but unbroken. Yet all flesh, even that of an Astartes, has its limit. It happened not with a thunderclap, but with a sudden flash of agony. A shell screamed through the haze, a sound too fast to evade. It struck his chest plate, tearing through ceramite, splitting bone, and plunging deep into organs that no apothecary could mend. He staggered, bolter falling silent, the battlefield's roar suddenly distant, like a memory muffled behind stone walls. His knees buckled. He tasted iron in his throat, felt the warmth of his own blood flooding lungs built to resist poison and fire, but not this. As he collapsed, time slowed. Around him, the war did not stop. Chainswords still screamed, las fire still cut the smoke, artillery still pounded the earth. But for him, the noise became hollow. He heard instead the pounding of his heart's faltering, the whisper of memory rising. Faces flickered before him, brothers at prayer, the banners of his chapter, the solemn voice of the chaplain, promising eternal service in the Emperor's light. He had always known his end would come like this, violent, sudden, on a field where no one had time to mourn. Yet some part of him had believed that death would bring peace. Hands seized him before darkness claimed all. Apothecaries moved swiftly, their narthiciums whirring, their voices low and precise. He felt the stab of needles, the burn of fluids coursing through shattered veins, the clamp of augmetic seals pressing against wounds too vast to close. Their words broke through the haze. Stabilize him, do not let him pass. Then another voice, colder, mechanical, the tone of a tech marine. He is lost to flesh, but not yet to service. Prepare the sarcophagus. Terror, rare and alien to him, clawed at the edge of his mind. He had heard the whispers in the reclusium, the quiet warnings spoken only among veterans. The sarcophagus, the iron tomb, death denied not as a blessing, but as a curse disguised as honor. He tried to protest, to force words from a throat drowning in blood, but only a rasp escaped, lost beneath the rumble of engines and the chanting of the litany of preservation. His vision dimmed as they carried him, not away from battle, but deeper into it. The sounds of war receded, replaced by the clang of adamantine doors, the hiss of hydraulic seals, the cold echo of chambers reserved only for the most grievously wounded. He was lowered onto a slab of iron, cables descending like serpents, wrapping his body, piercing flesh, flooding him with invasive cold. His eyes, dimming now, caught a single glimpse of the sarcophagus, a coffin of steel, its interior lined with ports and needles, its surface engraved with the imperial aquila. It looked less like salvation and more like execution. His last thought, as his heart finally gave way, was not of triumph or faith, but of fear. Fear that he would wake again, not in the Emperor's embrace, but in a darkness where flesh was forgotten and only the machine endured. And then silence took him. There was no light, no breath, no flesh. Brother Captain Luther awoke not to the warmth of the Emperor's eternal light, but to a void. It was not death, but something colder, quieter, infinitely heavier. He searched for the rise and fall of lungs, for the pounding of hearts, for the familiar anchor of flesh and bone. None answered. There was only stillness, a silence that stretched too far, as though he drifted alone through the dark between stars. Then came the voices, muffled at first, distant through thick walls of iron, chanting, mechanical, relentless. The voices of tech marines reciting the litanies of activation, their words carved into his mind like nails scratching stone. For a moment he did not understand. Then he felt it, a surge of alien energy coursing through veins that were no longer veins, flooding circuits instead of arteries, sparking across cables buried deep in him. Pain followed. Not sharp like the wound that killed him, but dull and endless, as if every part of him was pressed beneath mountains of weight. His eyes opened, or what remained of them. No lids, no lashes, no human warmth. Instead, data screamed across his vision, targeting glyphs, streams of tactical readouts, spectral overlays he could not turn away from. He wanted to blink, to shut it out, but the machine denied him. He tried to move his hand. He had commanded squads, raised blades against the enemies of mankind, crushed the skulls of heretics. Now his hand did not answer. Instead, something massive shifted. A metallic groan echoed in the chamber, the slow dragging of adamantium limbs. The realization struck him with the weight of a world. His body was gone. In its place stood a walking fortress, armored, weaponed, chained by power feeds and control runes. The sarcophagus had claimed him. Fear swelled into rage. No, this was not the Emperor's promise. This was not eternal rest. I was faithful. I was ready. I was finished. His thoughts thundered, but only silence answered. No lips to move, no throat to roar. His fury died unheard, swallowed by iron walls. Then a voice pierced the silence within. It was deep, mechanical, layered with vox distortion, yet carried tones of familiarity. The chaplain of his chapter, Brother Luther. You endure. Rejoice, for the Emperor has granted you purpose beyond death. Purpose, that word stabbed deeper than any blade. He tried to deny it, to plead for release, but again, no words came. Only the hiss of hydraulics, the whir of servos. His silence was mistaken for reverence. The tech marines disconnected the cables. The chamber shuddered as clamps released. His colossal form was freed, towering over those who had once been his equals. Where once he had stood shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, now he loomed above them, a giant in iron, a relic of both glory and horror. They bowed to me. He should have felt pride, but instead there was only the cold certainty that they were not bowing to Luther, the man. They were bowing to the machine that had devoured him. He took his first step, and the ground trembled. It was not walking, it was a prison dragging itself forward. Each motion reminded him that his body was gone, replaced by pistons, hydraulics, servos whining with every move. He longed for the ache of muscle, the rhythm of breath, even the pain of wounds. Those were gone, replaced by the endless drone of machines that never tired. The chaplain's voice echoed again. You shall fight where no mortal may stand. You shall endure where flesh fails. You are eternal. Brother, you are a dreadnought. The word fell heavy. Dreadnought. The word fell heavy. Dreadnought. Eternal warrior. Iron tomb. Luther remembered the whispers in the reclusium, the warnings he had dismissed as superstition. Better to die than to live as a dreadnought. Some had murmured. He had thought them cowards. Now he understood. As they led him toward the battlefield once more, he felt a truth sink into him. Colder than any wound, death had been denied him, but peace. The sky was already burning when they unleashed him. Smoke choked the horizon, thick with the acrid tang of promethium, and the ruined manufacturum fields stretched before him in jagged silhouettes of twisted steel. He remembered entering battle with the familiar heat of blood in his veins, the anticipation of a blade in his hand, the cries of brothers at his side. Now the anticipation was different. It was weight, pressure, a machine spirit humming inside him, restless, eager for slaughter. The tech marines whispered through the vox, their incantations still clinging to his circuits like shackles. He hated the way their words crawled into his mind, but he could not turn them away. Each step shook the earth, each motion accompanied by the chorus of whining servos and groaning pistons. He moved, but it was not his own will. It was something else, something vast and iron-bound, dragging him forward into war. Ahead, the enemy had entrenched themselves. Orcs, their crude banners flapping in the smoke, their guttural roars reverberating across the valley. Once, he would have welcomed such a fight. Now, staring down at them from behind a vision filled with targeting glyphs and flashing Auspex readings, he felt nothing but cold detachment. The machine spirit hungered, but his soul recoiled. A command cut through his silence. Advance. He obeyed, because he could not do otherwise. His massive frame lurched forward, earth cratering beneath adamantium feet. The orcs jeered and howled, their weapons sparking with crude energy, and when they saw him rise above the smoke, they bellowed their savage challenge. He wanted to answer with a roar of his own, to remind them there was still a man within this walking coffin, but the Vox grill spat only static. The machine spirit surged, and his weapons came alive. The assault cannon roared, spitting streams of fire that tore green flesh apart in wet bursts. Each pull of the trigger rattled through his being, every death counted not by instinct, but by glowing runes that updated without pause across his vision. His other arm lifted, a power fist the size of a transport vehicle, and when it came down upon the enemy line, bones shattered and crude armor split like paper. The brothers of his chapter advanced behind him, bolters singing hymns of death, their voices raised in battle cries. They sounded alive. They sounded human. But Luther was something else now, something less and more. He was a wall of iron, a weapon given voice through slaughter, and yet he felt it, the ache of memory beneath the iron. He remembered the feel of a sword hilt in his hand, the rhythm of a shield block, the intimate dance of combat that spoke of skill, of will, of human determination. Now there was none of that. His strikes were devastating but clumsy, guided more by servos than muscle, more by programming than instinct. He was power without grace, destruction without artistry. The orcs tried to swarm him, their crude choppers scraping across his armor. They screamed and cursed in their brutish tongue, clambering onto his legs, hacking with rusted blades. He tried to swat them away as a man would brush off vermin, but his fist swung too wide, pulverizing half a dozen at once, leaving only smears of gore across the broken ground. Each kill fed the machine spirit, its hum rising into something like triumph, but for Luther there was only emptiness. A rocket slammed against his torso, shaking his sarcophagus with bone-deep vibration. The armor held, but the impact rang through him, every tremor magnified into his nerves. He felt the jolt as pain, even though flesh no longer existed. His body may have been gone, but his mind still screamed as if it lived. The chaplain's voice returned, booming over the Vox. Behold the Emperor's wrath made manifest. Behold the eternal warrior. His brothers cheered, their faith unbroken. They saw him as a symbol, as a living relic. But Luther knew the truth. The battle was over, but for Luther, there was no release. His brothers stripped their helmets, their faces slick with sweat and ash, their eyes alive with the fire of victory. They clapped one another on the shoulders, exchanging blessings and oaths for the next engagement. He remembered that ritual. Once, he remembered smiling through bloodied lips, feeling the strength of comradeship in every shared glance. Now he lingered at the edge of their celebration, his immense frame looming over them, voiceless, motionless, chained by the silence of his sarcophagus. The tech marines approached with reverence, their red robes dragging across the scorched earth, their servo arms twitching like the limbs of hungry insects. They chanted as they came, each word an ancient prayer that clung to the air like smoke. Incense burned from censers mounted on their harnesses, filling the valley with bitter perfume to drive away malign spirits. The machine spirit within him stirred, purring with satisfaction as their voices rose in metallic chorus. Luther felt it as a pressure behind his mind, a demand that he yield to the liturgy. He resisted, quietly, though resistance meant nothing. The ritual began. They anointed his armor with sacred oils, traced runes of warding across the adamantium plates, and whispered benedictions through Vox filters crusted with age. To the tech marines, This was not simple repair, it was communion, a sacred dialogue between flesh and iron. They crooned to the machine spirit, coaxing it into stillness, soothing its hunger with promises of future war. For Luther, it was humiliation. They did not speak to him. They did not address the warrior who bled, who fought, who remembered the sting of battle. Their words flowed to the machine, not the man within. He tried to close his eyes, but there were no eyes to close. The world was a constant flood of data, streaming in ceaseless patterns of glyphs, auspex warnings and tactical overlays. He could not look away from the tech marines as they worked, their tools sparking against his armor, their incantations woven into the whine of servos and the hiss of pneumatics. He longed for silence, he longed for darkness, but the sarcophagus allowed neither. His brothers knelt before him when the ritual was complete, their heads bowed, their voices raised in solemn prayer. They thanked him for his sacrifice. They called him eternal. They spoke of his service as a gift to the chapter and to the emperor himself. Their voices carried respect, awe, even love. And yet, each word was a chain: eternal service, eternal sacrifice, eternal war. Did they know what that meant? Did they know that the warrior they venerated still lived inside this iron coffin, screaming against the walls of his tomb? Or did they think he was gone, his soul merged with the machine, content to be a relic that spoke through fire and death? He wanted to tell them, he wanted to remind them that he was still Luther, that he remembered their names, their victories, their failings. But his vox grill remained silent, locked behind layers of sacred wards. When he tried to force words through, only static bled into the air. The procession began. They marched him back through the ruin. Time lost all shape within the iron coffin. Luther floated in a state that was not waking, not sleeping, but a cruel suspension between the two. The machine spirit's hum was the only rhythm that marked his awareness, a steady vibration that seemed to seep into his very soul. At first, he fought it, clinging to memories, forcing himself to recall the names of brothers, the details of campaigns, the feeling of rain on armor, or the sting of an orc cleaver against his shield. But as the silence deepened, those memories thinned, their edges eroded by the endless monotony of waiting. Sometimes he tried to count the passing of moments, measuring each pulse of power against the next. But the sarcophagus betrayed him. The intervals stretched and collapsed, seconds becoming hours, hours collapsing into nothing. He could not trust the flow of time. What felt like a week might have been a day, what felt like a century might only have been a year, and so he floated, lost in a darkness, lit only by faint runes that flickered across his vision like embers refusing to die. When he dreamed, if such things could be called dreams, they were broken fragments. A battlefield drenched in fire, the cry of a brother cut short by a bolt round, the Emperor's golden light, radiant and distant, the laughter of men who no longer lived. But these visions twisted in the dark, faces blurred into masks, voices warped into vox static. The Emperor's light burned too bright to look upon. He began to fear his own memories, unsure which were truth, and which were the cruel inventions of a soul imprisoned too long. And then inevitably came the awakening. It began with sound, low guttural chanting, the scrape of metal on stone, the hiss of incense burners being swung in ritual arcs. The tech marines entered his chamber like priests approaching an altar. Their voices rose, woven with mechanical intonations and the harsh click of binary. His awareness sharpened against his will. Systems stirred, runes brightened, and the machine spirit within him awoke like a predator sensing prey. It roared through his nerves, flooding his mind with impulses he could not resist. Weapons systems tested themselves, targeting matrices flared and hydraulic limbs twitched against the chains that held him in place. The tech marines blessed every motion, singing praises as if the machine itself were holy. They inserted data spikes into access ports, reading his status, probing his memories, ensuring the man inside remained viable. He hated those intrusions most of all. They crawled into his thoughts without asking, their prayers piercing the fragile sanctity of what remained of his humanity. He wanted to shout at them, to remind them he was still there, that he was not merely a cog in their mechanicum rites. But the sarcophagus did not allow defiance, only silence. The rituals escalated, Servitors moved among the ranks of slumbering dreadnoughts, their pallid flesh twitching under bionic grafts as they polished armor, repaired rents and replaced purity seals that had crumbled with age. They daubed fresh oil across his plates, its sharp tang flooding his senses mingled with the cloying incense of sacred unguents. The smell clung to him like chains. It was the smell of awakening, the herald of war. Then came the voice. Not a tech marine, not a servitor, but the voice of a chaplain, deep, resonant, carried on faith that pierced even the prison of iron. The chaplain spoke the words of the Codex, of duty, of sacrifice. He called upon the Emperor's name, weaving scripture into command. The words slid into Luther's mind with the force of inevitability. He wanted to resist, but the words were chains of faith as much as the sarcophagus was chains of steel. His systems fully powered, his limbs unlocked, and his coffin opened to the world once more. The chaplain's face appeared before him, lit by the pale glow of lumen globes, eyes burning with zeal. "Ancient Luther," he intoned, "it is time." Those words cut deeper than any blade. Time, as though time meant anything to him now. For Luther, there was only the prison, the waiting, and the war. He wished for a heartbeat, that the sarcophagus had failed, that the tech marines had found only silence within. But no such mercy was granted. The Emperor demanded his service, and service would be eternal. He moved again, the weight of his frame. The strike cruiser drifted through the void, its decks alive with the disciplined routines of the chapter. Battle brothers drilled in the halls, their chants echoing like the thunder of a storm contained within steel walls. Servitors shuffled through the corridors, burdened with crates of ammunition and racks of weapons, their blank gazes ignoring the weight of their labor. Priests of the Reclusium walked among them, their Crozius Arcanum striking against the deck in steady rhythm, guiding the hearts of warriors toward faith. In that place of order, of devotion, of brotherhood, Luther remained a monument apart. They visited him sometimes, the younger initiates who had never seen the horrors of his existence. They came in groups, armored still, their faces stern with awe and reverence. They stood before his sarcophagus, heads bowed, speaking to him as though he were not a man but a relic. "Ancient Luther," they would whisper, "your sacrifice gives us strength, your vigil inspires us." Their words were sincere, their faith was unshaken, but their eyes never saw him. They saw only the dreadnought, the iron, the weapon. He tried to answer them. He strained against the static of his vox grill, desperate to remind them he was more than a machine, that he once laughed as they laughed, bled as they bled. Sometimes a flicker of sound would escape, a rasp of broken static that made them step back in awe, convinced the machine spirit itself had blessed them with acknowledgement. They never knew it was him. They never understood. His brothers of old, the ones who had fought at his side as men, visited less often. They came with silence in their eyes, heavy with memories they dared not speak. They knew what it meant to look upon him. They knew what it meant to be entombed. They offered words of respect, brief and weighted, before retreating back into the world of the living. To linger too long before the dreadnoughts was to glimpse one's own future, and few could stomach that truth. The chaplains came more frequently. Their faith was armor stronger than ceramite, their voices unyielding as they delivered litanies meant to bind his spirit to the Emperor's will. They did not speak to him as a man, but as an eternal warrior, a vessel of divine purpose. They spoke of glory, of eternal duty, of the Emperor's unending light. Their words were fire, meant to sear doubt from his soul, but to Luther, that fire was cold. He did not doubt the Emperor, he doubted the mercy of endless existence. Between rituals and battles, there were moments when silence filled the chamber, when the other dreadnoughts around him stood immobile, their machine spirits slumbering, their sarcophagi locked in stillness. In those hours, he was alone with the weight of himself. He listened to the hum of the cruiser's engines, the faint vibration of its passage through the void. He tried to think of his life before entombment. He tried to recall faces, voices, the taste of air untainted by incense and oil, but memory betrayed him. Details blurred, names slipped through his grasp. What remained were fragments, disjointed and cruel, laughter without context, battle without clarity, prayers without end. He wondered if the other ancients suffered as he did. Did they scream within their prisons, unheard beneath the iron, or had they surrendered to the machine spirit, allowing themselves to dissolve into the static? He longed to ask them, to reach across the silence and find solace in shared torment, but dreadnoughts did not speak to each other in the long dark between wars. They stood as monuments, their voices locked away until the battlefield called them to slaughter once again. And so he lingered, caught between the living and the dead, revered as a saint yet treated as an object, surrounded by brothers who could never truly understand. They saw him as a symbol of hope, a reminder of the chapter's endurance. To Luther, it was isolation sharpened into eternity. He was surrounded by those who loved him, and yet he had never been more alone. The call to war came not with alarms, but with ritual. Within the echoing vaults of the strike cruiser, the Reclusium filled with the sound of chanting. Battle brothers gathered in ranks, their armor-polished purity seals fluttering in the recycled air, each one carrying the weight of devotion like a second skin. Incense filled the chamber, smoke coiling upward until the ceiling was lost in shadow. At the heart of it all stood the slumbering dreadnoughts, their forms silent and immense, draped in chains of sanctity and wards that had yellowed with age. The younger Marines approached first. Their faces were tight with anticipation, their eyes fixed upon the monuments of iron. They carried relics of battle, spent bolt casings, shattered fragments of enemy blades, scraps of banners scorched in fire. Each offering was placed at the feet of the dreadnoughts, tokens of reverence given to warriors who had outlasted death itself. Their lips moved in prayer, words whispered not to Luther, not to the men entombed, but to the icons they believed these machines to be. They did not see the prison within, they saw only the eternal warriors promised by the chaplains. The chaplains themselves strode forward next, their Crozius Arcanum held aloft, their armor heavy with scrolls and seals. Their voices rang out in unison, booming through the chamber like thunder. Arise, ancients, arise, guardians of the chapter. Arise, servants of the Emperor who knows no end. The sound struck the sarcophagus like a hammer, rattling through Luther's consciousness, pulling him up from the depths of his stagnant awareness. Inside the iron coffin his mind recoiled. He wanted to stay in the half-darkness, where time lost meaning and silence dulled the agony of remembrance. But the rituals were chains, dragging him upward, flooding his vision with awakening runes. Systems re-engaged one by one, each activation a sharp intrusion against his thoughts. Power coursed through the machine spirit, and it screamed in exultation, drowning his protests. From the outside, the awakening was a miracle. The ground trembled as the dreadnoughts stirred, servos whining, massive limbs flexing against centuries of stillness. Marines fell to their knees, their prayers rising into a fervent storm. They saw titans waking from holy slumber, their faith confirmed by every grinding motion, every hiss of pneumatics. For them it was awe, for Luther it was torment. The tech Marines joined the rite, their red robes swaying, their mechadendrites sparking with blessed contact. They anointed armor plates with sacred oils, each gesture accompanied by Binharic cant. Their hands worked with mechanical precision, sealing cracks, testing joints, recalibrating weapons. They spoke not to the warrior trapped inside, but to the machine spirit, as though it were the only true soul that dwelled within. Luther could feel their presence probing, adjusting, refining. He wanted to shout at them, to beg them to acknowledge him, not the iron shell but the man it devoured. But his voice was static, buried beneath the machine's growl. The ritual reached its crescendo. The chaplains raised their Crozius high, and the brothers roared their battle hymn. The chamber vibrated with the force of it, a tidal wave of devotion crashing against iron walls. And as the hymn reached its peak, the dreadnought's eyes flared to life, glowing with harsh light that pierced the smoke. To the living, it was the gaze of eternity itself. To Luther, it was the final shackle snapping shut. The Marines shouted oaths of victory, their fists striking against their chests in thunderous rhythm. They looked upon the dreadnoughts with unshakable belief, seeing only gods of war awakened for their cause. None saw the truth. None saw the man inside, whose soul. The drop pod slammed into the mud with the fury of a comet. Impact thrusters screamed, the ground split apart, and in a burst of fire and smoke the massive petals of the pod opened outward. The world beyond was chaos. Ashen skies, choking clouds of dust, and the thunder of artillery, shaking the bones of the earth. From within the cradle, Luther felt his cage lurch forward. His sarcophagus jolted as the restraints released, and servos screamed in protest as his armored frame lurched into motion. His first step sank deep into the mire, crushing stone and bone alike beneath his colossal weight. To the warriors gathered around him, it was an awe-inspiring sight, a dreadnought unleashed upon the battlefield. To Luther, it was a waking nightmare that would not end. Bolters cracked all around. The younger Marines fought with zeal, their cries of devotion carrying even over the endless din. For the Emperor, for the chapter, they shouted, voices ablaze with faith. To them, this war was glory. To him it was the endless repetition of horror, every field another mirror of the last, every foe just another shape to be ground beneath iron. He advanced, his heavy cannon roaring to life. The recoil thrummed through the sarcophagus, a shockwave rattling his imprisoned body. A wall of enemy flesh disintegrated under his fire, men and beasts alike torn apart in a storm of shells. His power fist clenched, crushing barricades into ruin, tearing armored vehicles like parchment. To the Marines at his side, he was unstoppable. To himself, he was only a weapon dragged unwilling into slaughter. Every step sank deeper into the mire of memory. He remembered battlefields past, worlds where the sky burned, where oceans boiled away, where screams never ended. It was all the same again and again. Luther no longer remembered the names of most of those planets, or the foes he had fought there. The details blurred together, washed out by the sheer magnitude of years. All that remained was the sameness, the stink of blood, the ceaseless thunder, the endless cycle of waking, killing, and returning to the dark. Explosions rocked the ground. A wave of enemy fire washed over him, glancing from his armored form, scorching his plates. He did not flinch. He could not. His body was iron, his nerves dulled by circuitry and armor. Yet within the sarcophagus, his soul recoiled at every strike. He longed to stumble, to fall, to be broken beyond repair. But the prison held him upright, forcing him forward, always forward. A squad of enemy infantry surged from the smoke, their crude weapons sparking against his plates, their faces twisted with desperation. They fought not as soldiers but as animals cornered. He raised his fist and brought it down. The ground quaked with the impact, bodies reduced to pulp beneath the weight of his blow. His cannon roared again, tearing them apart before they could even scream. The Marines cheered. The ancient fights with us, the Emperor's wrath made flesh. They surged. The battlefield cooled only in degrees, as though the very soil refused to release its anguish. Smoke drifted in ragged ribbons, drifting across broken walls and shattered armor. The scent of promethium fires clung to everything, mingling with the iron stench of spilled blood. Across the ruins, apothecaries moved quietly among the fallen, their nartheciums humming as they extracted the progenoid glands of the dead. Every recovery was done with solemn precision, every act accompanied by whispered prayers. Victory had been claimed, yet it felt to Luther like a graveyard stretched without end. The dreadnought stood immobile in the silence that followed the slaughter. To the Marines, his stillness was reverence, the poise of an ancient gazing upon the field of sacrifice. In truth, it was exhaustion without the release of rest. He could not sit, he could not kneel, he could not weep for the lost. His sarcophagus kept him upright, locked into the posture of war, the eternal sentinel who would never bow. Presently the tech Marines came. Their red armor gleamed against the ruin, servo arms clicking as they approached. They moved without hesitation, their chants metallic and steady, every word a mixture of prayer and machine code. To them, Luther was not merely a brother, he was sacred machinery, half flesh, half relic, a convergence of the Omnissiah's blessing and the Emperor's will. They did not look at him as a man. They saw only the relic that needed tending. Their incantations grew louder as they circled him. Incense wafted in coils of grey smoke, the tang of sacred oils drifting into the air. Servitors clanked forward, their augmetics carrying chains and clamps. Luther felt the weight of their ministrations as mechadendrites snaked across his frame, scraping away charred fragments of armor, sealing rents with molten adamantium. Sparks cascaded across his vision. The pain was muted but constant, dulled by the machine yet alive in some corner of his failing nerves. He wanted to scream at them, to tell them to stop, to leave the wounds unhealed, to let the weakness spread until it claimed him entirely. But the sarcophagus gave him no voice, no agency. His vox grill transmitted only what the chaplains deemed fitting, filtered prayers or brief words of command. His own cries remained trapped inside, echoing endlessly in a chamber of steel where no ear could hear them. The chaplain arrived as the tech marines worked. Cloaked in black, Crozius clutched in gauntleted fist, he moved with the solemnity of ritual. His vox-amplified voice boomed across the ruin, drowning the whispers of the dying with the weight of scripture. He spoke of valor and sacrifice, of the immortal bond of the chapter, of the Emperor's eternal gaze. His words wrapped around Luther like chains, gilded shackles that pressed him further into his prison. To the younger Marines, the chaplain's presence was a fire in the soul, lifting their hearts above grief, binding their resolve for battles yet to come. To Luther, it was another reminder that there would be no end. Each hymn, each prayer, each litany of honor was also a declaration that his torment must continue, sanctified and preserved by the very faith he once held dear. When the rites were complete, the tech marines sealed his wounds and reignited dormant systems with bursts of sacred charge. Every strike of the electro-gavel rattled through his body, reawakening circuits that he had longed to see fade. His vision brightened, his limbs grew firm again, and his prison stood ready once more. They praised the Omnissiah, they praised the Emperor, they called him blessed for enduring. As the final hymn echoed into silence, the tech marines withdrew, satisfied. The chaplain lingered a moment longer, gazing up at the towering frame. Ancient, he intoned through the grill of his helm. When the vault sealed, the world fell away. The sound of battle was replaced by the muffled groan of stone and metal, the deep hum of generators, the hiss of cooling vents. All light vanished, leaving only the amber glow of internal runes. Luther's senses folded inward, trapped in a prison of thought and memory. To a living warrior, rest meant the relief of exhaustion, the healing of wounds, the silence of sleep. To him, rest was a mockery. His mind did not fade into dreams. It sharpened against the bars of confinement, circling endlessly, a blade honed too long. Time was the cruelest torment. Minutes bled into hours, hours into days, and he could not tell where one ended and the other began. Without battle to mark the flow of existence, the days stretched into a suffocating blur. Centuries could pass in that tomb. Each second weighted like iron upon his soul. He could not close his eyes, could not banish the flicker of failing memory. He could only wait, an eternity of stillness broken only by the occasional tremor of a tech marine's inspection, or the distant toll of a monastery bell. At first the silence was filled with recollections. He summoned images of his youth, the fields of his birth world, the laughter of brothers who no longer drew breath. He remembered the heat of sunlight upon unscarred flesh, the crisp weight of a bolter held for the first time, the fierce pride of swearing loyalty to the chapter. These visions gave him comfort, fleeting and fragile, like catching the scent of summer in the middle of a storm. But memory corrodes in the dark. The faces grew indistinct, their voices muffled, the warmth of their presence turned to shadows. He began to wonder if those memories were his at all, or merely fictions conjured by a desperate mind. Soon came the whispers, not voices of the living, not prayers of the chaplains, but echoes within himself, fragments of thought breaking apart and reshaping into something unfamiliar. They told him he was forgotten, that the chapter no longer saw him as a brother, but as a weapon on a shelf. They told him his victories meant nothing, that he had died on the battlefield long ago, and what remained was a puppet of steel. He tried to banish them, to chant the litanies drilled into his soul, but the silence always returned, and with it the whispers. Sometimes he saw visions, not with eyes but in the dim theater of his failing mind. He walked through ruins he had never known, fought enemies whose faces he could not place, heard the thunder of bolters fired by hands that no longer existed. Were these memories distorted by centuries of stasis, or dreams clawing their way into his waking thought? He could not know. All he could feel was the slow erosion of certainty, like stone worn by endless water. The worst moments were not the visions of war, but the ghosts of peace. He imagined standing beneath an open sky, stars burning bright above, the sound of leaves in the wind. He imagined voices unbound by vox grills, laughter unchained by duty, the touch of human warmth. Each image was agony, a reminder of sensations his body could no longer grasp. The sarcophagus had stolen them from him, leaving only longing where once there had been life. Yet the chapter called him blessed. When they spoke, they named him eternal. They said his endurance was proof of divine favor. To them his prison was a shrine, his suffering a litany of honor. He wanted to rage at them, to demand release, to beg for the Emperor's mercy. But the vox remained sealed, his words strangled before they could ever reach another. He was a relic now, and relics did not speak. Relics endured, and so the centuries wore on. Silence gave way to whispers, whispers to visions, visions to despair. He clung to fragments of identity, as though they were weapons. The wail of klaxons pierced the void like knives, cutting through centuries of silence. Emergency runes flared across his vision, each symbol blazing with crimson urgency, dragging him from the drowning depths of memory into the cold immediacy of war. His sarcophagus trembled as magnetic locks disengaged, pistons groaning with the strain of release. The darkness of the vault split open, blinding light pouring in, harsh and merciless, like the gaze of judgment itself. For a moment he almost believed it was the sun. For a moment he almost wept. The clamps withdrew, and servitors swarmed around his frame, their lifeless chants droning as they prepared the ancient war machine for battle. They anointed the armor with sacred oils, their voices low and mechanical, a parody of reverence. Tech marines followed close behind, their augmetic limbs clicking, data streams spilling from their voxcasters in bursts of binharic. They probed his systems, awakening dormant circuits, coaxing long-idled hydraulics back into the rhythm of destruction. With each connection, each surge of power, he felt his body returning, not as flesh, not as spirit, but as the familiar burden of steel and fire. The chaplain appeared once more, robed in black, Crozius raised high. His voice thundered across the chamber, reverberating from the vault walls, drowning the servitor's hum. He spoke of duty, of the Emperor's eternal vigilance, of the chapter's desperate need. Every word was a chain and a whip. They called him to glory, but he heard only compulsion. They promised honor, but he felt only the weight of inevitability. "Awaken, ancient Luther," the chaplain intoned, his voice magnified until it shook the chamber. "The foe rises, vile and numberless. The Emperor demands your wrath once more. You shall walk among us as death incarnate." There was no question, there was never a choice. His sarcophagus shuddered as energy coursed through every circuit, the machine spirit roaring to life, with an eagerness he could not match. Runic displays sharpened, hydraulic limbs flexed, weapons hummed with awakening hunger. For the first time in centuries he moved. The vault quaked with the sound of adamantium feet striking the ground. To the brothers gathered, it was awe made manifest. To him it was the return of chains long tightened. They led him through the fortress monastery's echoing halls, banners fluttering, incense rising in suffocating clouds. Younger space marines walked in solemn procession beside him, their eyes burning with reverence. To them he was the living past, proof that their deeds could outlast flesh. They whispered his name as though it were a prayer. He wanted to tell them the truth that eternity was no gift, that the sarcophagus was no salvation, but his vox remained bound, releasing only ritual responses, fragments of catechism coded into his prison. The great gates yawned open, and beyond them lay the landing bay. The air was thick with ozone and engine smoke, storm ravens roaring as they prepared for launch. Thunderhawks lined the deck, their hulls painted with the scars of countless campaigns. The moment he crossed the threshold, the deck vibrated beneath his tread. Crews and servitors fell silent as he passed, lowering their heads, offering the aquila with trembling hands. He towered above them, a walking relic, the Emperor's fury clad in steel. To them his presence was assurance. To him it was only the cycle repeating, an endless wheel that dragged him from the grave into the fire again and again. The Tech Marines secured him into the Thunderhawk's hold, chains and clamps locking into place with mechanical precision. The bay doors sealed, darkness swallowing the chamber once more. The Thunderhawk screamed through the void, its armored hull shuddering under the force of re-entry. The heat of atmosphere burned against the plating, casting the world outside into a furnace of fire and smoke. Inside the hold, Luther felt the tremors run through his frame, every vibration rattling deep into the sarcophagus. The Tech Marines had bolted him into place, but no restraint could quiet the anticipation of descent. He had made this journey countless times, yet each felt like the same passage into damnation, a rebirth into battle, dragged from one grave into another. The Vox crackled with clipped voices, squad leaders barked coordinates, Auspex readings scrolled in runic streams across his vision, tactical data overlaying the endless storm of static. Luther ignored most of it. He did not need to know the minutiae of deployments or the details of enemy disposition. He knew only one truth: when the ramp opened, he would kill until his weapons fell silent, and then he would wait until the next awakening. That was the rhythm of his existence, the brutal cadence of an eternal soldier. The chaplain's voice rose again, booming above the din of the Thunderhawk's engines. He recited verses of vengeance, calling the Marines aboard to glory. The younger warriors echoed in unison, their voices carrying fervor, a chorus of belief so strong it shook the air itself. To them this descent was sacred, another chance to carve honor into the annals of the chapter. To Luther it was chains tightening once more, binding him to endless violence. He wanted to shout at them, to tell them the truth, but the Vox only allowed the approved responses, praises, prayers, affirmations of loyalty. His silence was masked as devotion. His torment was hidden behind the illusion of faith. The descent slowed, engines roaring as the Thunderhawk pierced the last layers of cloud. The display across his vision shifted, runes flashing as the landscape below revealed itself. He saw a world in ruin, manufactorums burning, cities reduced to rubble, rivers of smoke coiling into the sky. The ground was alive with movement, the scuttling of enemy forces swarming across the ruins like insects. The machine spirit of his sarcophagus stirred at the sight, recognition burning in its circuits, eager for the slaughter to begin. Luther felt the hunger rising, not his own, but the machine's will pressing against him, urging him to unleash its fury. He resisted, but the tide always won. The Thunderhawk shook as flak fire slammed against its hull, the thunder of impacts reverberating through every bolt and plate. Marines braced themselves, bolters clutched tight, eyes alight with zeal. Luther felt the strain ripple through the gunship, but his towering frame remained unmoved, locked in place, immovable as stone. He could not fear the crash, nor could he pray for survival. The machine ensured he would endure, whether he wished to or not. The Vox barked orders, deployment zones, objectives, priority targets. His vision highlighted them in crimson: strong points to be shattered, armor columns to be broken, enemy leaders to be annihilated. His weapon systems cycled to readiness, power surging through the plasma cannon, servos whirring as the dread fist clenched. The hum of violence filled the hold, every sound a reminder that he was not a man, but an engine of death waiting to be unleashed. At last the ramp dropped, light and sound flooded the chamber, a storm of fire and thunder. The roar of bolters, the hiss of last fire, the detonation of shells, it all crashed in at once, overwhelming, deafening, familiar. The Marines surged forward, their war cries a hymn of devotion. Chains unclamped from his frame, and he stepped into the furnace of war. The ground shook beneath his adamantium feet, each stride tearing craters into the earth. Battle swallowed him whole. The plasma cannon roared, beams of white-hot energy searing through armor, turning flesh and steel alike into molten ruin. His dread fist, the ground buckled beneath the weight of war. Each step Luther took sent cracks spidering across the broken streets, his adamantium frame a living battering ram. The plasma cannon sang in booming rhythm, every discharge reducing enemy armor to twisted wreckage, every blast illuminating the battlefield in white-blue fury. The dread fist clenched and shattered bodies with mechanical precision, the hydraulic scream of servos blending seamlessly with the cries of the dying. He moved forward because that was all he could do, each strike pushing him deeper into the storm. But this foe was no rabble to scatter. Their discipline was sharp, their numbers vast, and their weapons unrelenting. Heavy cannons rained fire upon him, each impact jarring his sarcophagus, slamming pain into nerves that should have been long dead. Warnings flared across his vision, armor breached, systems overheating, servo strain climbing beyond tolerance. The machine spirit within his prison bellowed with rage, demanding vengeance, overriding caution with a surge of power that he could not resist. His body was no longer his own. It never had been. Through the smoke and ruin, he glimpsed his brothers locked in desperate combat. Tactical Marines advanced in staggered lines, bolters thundering, chanting litanies of hate. Assault squads descended from the sky, chainswords roaring as they carved bloody paths through enemy ranks. He should have felt pride, the same burning camaraderie that once united him with them. Instead, he felt distance like a shadow watching a memory replayed endlessly. They bled and died beside him, but he could not die with them. He could only endure. Enemy war machines rose from the haze, lumbering walkers bristling with guns and blades. Their engines screamed as they advanced, massive silhouettes cutting through the smoke. Luthar's targeting arrays locked instinctively, runes flashing as the machine spirit exulted. He unleashed plasma fire, vaporizing one in a storm of molten ruin, but the others pressed forward, their weapons hammering against his frame. His dread fist smashed through armor, tearing a cockpit in half, the pilot's scream silenced in an instant. Yet each victory was met with equal pain, gouges torn into his plating, hydraulics hissing as pressure failed, sparks cascading across his vision. The machine spirit roared louder, drowning his thoughts with its hunger. It gloried in destruction, demanding more. He tried to pull back, to regain control, but the sarcophagus denied him. Every instinct, every movement, every scream of defiance was translated into violence. His body belonged to the war, and the war would not let him go. Then came the moment of fracture. A shell, massive and precise, struck his side with a thunderclap of force. Armor ruptured, warning runes flared, and pain surged like fire through what nerves remained. He staggered, one knee slamming into the ground with a quake that shook the ruins around him. For a heartbeat, he thought the end had come, that perhaps the Emperor had granted him mercy. Darkness crowded his vision, systems flickered, stuttering toward collapse, but mercy never came. The Tech Marines' fail-safes triggered, power rerouted, systems screamed and reignited. He rose once more, slower, weaker, but unbroken. The foe had not killed him. The machine would not allow it. He was dragged back into torment, forced to continue, forced to kill. The enemy fell back, their advance crumbling beneath the relentless fury of the Astartes. Marines pressed the advantage, rallying. The battlefield was still burning when silence finally claimed it. Blackened ruins stretched in every direction, broken spires of stone and steel clawing at the ash-choked sky. Fires flickered in shattered buildings, casting long shadows that danced across the corpses of the fallen. The ground was carpeted in twisted metal and torn flesh, a testament to the ferocity of the clash. Among the ruin, Luthar stood motionless. His massive frame loomed over his brothers like a monument carved from war itself. Steam hissed from cracked vents, plasma residue glowing faintly along his scorched cannon. Every dent in his armor, every scar etched into his plating told the story of survival against impossible odds. To the Space Marines gathered around him, it was a vision of honor. To him, it was another reminder that he could not die. The surviving squads formed ranks, battered but unbroken. Their chaplain strode forward, his croziers held high, intoning praises to the Emperor. Behold the Ancient, through fire and fury he endures. Through him, the Emperor's will is made manifest. His voice carried across the ruins, each word striking the hearts of the warriors who listened. The Marines answered with a thunderous chant. For the Emperor, for the Ancient, for victory. Their voices echoed through the ruins, louder than the crackling of flames, louder even than the thunder of artillery still distant on the horizon. They looked upon Luthar as living proof of their unyielding spirit, a relic of the chapter's eternal defiance. But inside the sarcophagus, Luthar recoiled. Their faith pierced him like blades. They did not see the torment behind the steel. They saw only a hero, unbroken, eternal. They did not hear his silent scream, his desperate prayer for release. To them his prison was glory. To him, it was damnation. His vision flickered, and he saw the tech marines approaching, their servo arms whirring, incense burning as they prepared to enact the rites of repair. They moved with reverence, as though tending to a holy relic rather than a broken man trapped inside a shell. Their voices murmured litanies of maintenance, their tools sparking against cracked plating. Each touch bound him tighter to the machine. Each repair sealed his fate anew. Through it all the machine spirit rumbled, content in victory. It whispered in data bursts, a voice he could never silence. Glory, duty, war, kill again, endure again, rise again. It exulted in the slaughter, blind to the cost. Luthar tried to resist, tried to push back against its endless hunger, but his thoughts were drowned beneath its mechanical hymns. His soul was chained to its will. The apothecary approached, his armor still splattered with blood, carrying the gene seed of the fallen. He paused before Luthar, bowing low. Their sacrifice is not in vain, ancient. Through your endurance they are remembered. Through your strength, their deaths are redeemed. Luthar wanted to cry out, no, their deaths are not redeemed. They are gone, while I remain, shackled to a shell that mocks life. But no sound left his sarcophagus. His voice had been stolen long ago, replaced with vox filters that spoke only what the tech marines allowed. Silence was his curse. The battle was over, but the war pressed on. Orders came through the vox, distant but clear. Advance to the next sector, fortify, prepare for the counterattack. There was no rest, no mourning, only endless duty. The Marines saluted, tightened their formations, and began to march. And Luthar moved with them, his colossal steps shaking the earth. Each stride carried him farther from the battlefield, yet deeper into eternity. Around him, his brothers looked up with awe, their faith renewed by his survival. The war never ended. The battlefield was cleared, the dead catalogued, the wounded patched or interred, and within a single rotation the chapter's banners were already raised above another war zone. There was no respite, no silence, no moment in which the machine was stilled and the soul inside allowed to rest. Luthar was redeployed, his sarcophagus sealed tighter with every campaign, his body bound in ritual chains of steel and oath script. To his brothers, this was honor beyond mortal reckoning. To him it was the grinding weight of eternity. They arrived upon a world that had once been a jewel of the Imperium, now broken and bleeding under the clawed hand of Xenos marauders. The air itself was poison, thick with spore clouds and the metallic tang of ruptured manufactoria. Towers lay in ruin, their shattered peaks piercing the fog like broken teeth. Every street was a grave, every shadow a place where something waited to strike. As the strike force deployed, Luthar was lowered from the Thunderhawk into the smoking remains of a plaza. His feet crashed upon cracked stone, leaving craters where once Imperial citizens had walked. The vox crackled with orders, tactical updates, hymns of vengeance. The ground trembled with the march of the chapter. But within his sarcophagus, all he felt was the emptiness of his own beating heart against the iron silence that caged him. The enemy swarmed, alien forms surging through smoke and rubble. Chitin gleamed wetly in the dim light, claws scraping across the stone as they advanced in endless waves. The Marines formed a line, bolters roaring, plasma discharges searing the air, and Luthar waded forward, cannon and fist tearing through the tide. He crushed creatures by the dozen, each kill a brutal punctuation in the litany of slaughter. Limbs shattered under his weight, ichor boiled upon his armor, alien shrieks pierced the thunder of guns. His brothers fought with him, their voices raised in war cries, their hearts lifted by the shadow of the Dreadnought among them. They shouted his name, Ancient Luthar, the eternal, the Emperor's wrath made manifest. Every warrior who faltered found courage in his shadow. Every line that threatened to break was steadied by his towering form. He was their anchor. He was their myth. Yet in the prison of steel, he whispered only one thought, again and again, like a prayer denied: "End me. Please, let this be the battle that takes me." But no blow struck deep enough. No wound proved final. Where flesh would have failed, the machine endured. Where bone would have broken, steel held. Even as ichor hissed against his cracked plating, even as claws raked glowing trails across his armor, he lived. He endured. The machine spirit rejoiced. Its voice surged through the circuits, humming with exultation. More, more. The enemy is endless. The slaughter eternal. You are my will. You are my vessel. Kill for me, ancient. Kill forever. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a hymn rising in his skull until it drowned even his own thoughts. And yet a terrible truth sank deeper into Luther's mind with each passing engagement. He could feel himself changing. His memories blurred. The campaign stretched into months, then years, each conflict folding into the next, until time itself lost meaning. For the warriors of the chapter, this was duty. Their lives had always been measured in battles fought and worlds reclaimed for the Emperor. For Luther, it was something else entirely. Each deployment felt less like another strike in the ledger of war, and more like the grinding of millstones that pressed the remnants of his humanity into dust. He fought across a dozen worlds, frozen tundras where his armor steamed against the bitter wind, ash wastes where the ground shifted beneath his massive form, and jungle worlds where the foliage screamed as it burned under Promethean fire. Every environment offered new torments, every foe a different flavor of death. Yet through it all, one truth remained constant. Luther endured, and Luther killed. The brothers who once saluted him with reverence began to look upon him with unease. They still fought at his side, still roared his name as they charged into the jaws of the enemy, but in the quiet aftermath they whispered questions. Was he truly the same hero they remembered, or something else now, something swallowed by the machine? Some claimed they had heard his vox output distort in strange ways, words laced with echoes that did not sound entirely like his voice. Others swore his cannon fired before any order was given, as though the sarcophagus acted on its own hunger, and perhaps they were right. For within his prison, Luther struggled to remember the details of his own past, the memory of his own face, once clear as a shrine icon, now blurred into haze. The names of his fallen brothers, the scent of oil in the armory, the sound of laughter in the barracks, all of it dimmed, swallowed by the roar of the machine spirit that flooded every silence. His identity was not vanishing in a single moment of horror, but eroding grain by grain, until he was left staring into a mirror that reflected only steel. There were moments, terrifying moments, when he wondered if death had already come for him. Was this what it meant to die in service to the Emperor, not to pass into the afterlife, but to be bound forever, as a voice inside a machine? Had his soul already been reaped by the carrion lords of the warp, and what remained here was merely a ghost forced to pilot steel? He did not know. He could not know. The machine spirit seemed to sense his despair, and answered it with songs of victory. Its hymns rose higher, drowning his grief beneath their triumph. "You are eternal," it whispered in tones that rattled through his bones. "You are steel. You are vengeance. The galaxy cannot kill you, for you are already beyond flesh. You are more than man. You are forever." At times Luther caught himself believing it. The logic was seductive, a balm for the ache of his fading humanity. If he was no longer a man, then perhaps he was something greater, something necessary. Perhaps his suffering was not damnation but ascension. Perhaps this was the Emperor's true gift: to endure without end, to kill without hesitation, to live beyond the weakness of mortal flesh. But all the silence between campaigns had once been filled with prayer, with the measured tones of the chapter's chaplain echoing through the vox, binding warriors together in liturgy before the next storm of war. Now that silence seemed longer, colder, and filled with something unspoken. The brothers still marched with him, still raised their weapons when he strode at the fore, but in their eyes he began to see not only reverence, but a shadow of fear. It was subtle at first, Helmets tilted away when he turned, ritual gestures made hurriedly, as though warding something unseen. Tech Marines lingered near his sarcophagus longer than their tasks required, murmuring prayers not from the Codex Mechanicus, but older canticles, superstitions meant to bind restless spirits. And when the chaplain spoke before deployment, his invocations carried a new edge, not merely praising the Emperor's eternal will but denouncing false echoes, impostors, and the whisper of the warp. The words were aimed at the sinners, at the heretic, at the unclean, but Luther felt their weight fall upon him. Inside the sarcophagus, the war never ceased. The machine spirit grew louder with every battle, its hymns rising not in singular voice but in a chorus. At times it felt as though 1,000 mouths chanted within his mind, singing praises not to the Emperor but to endurance itself, to the glory of steel, to the eternity of war. Luther tried to drown them in his own prayers, tried to force his thoughts into the words of his chapter's liturgy, but the lines faltered, the verses slipped, and soon even his prayers sounded like theirs. Memories fractured like glass beneath pressure. He would close his eyes and see not his brothers at war, but strangers, faces that melted into the blank gaze of helms, then dissolved into the featureless masks of servitors. He would recall victories that never occurred, campaigns that belonged to another life, perhaps another century. Sometimes he questioned whether the flesh inside the sarcophagus was even his. Perhaps the body had long ago withered to dust, and only his soul was chained here, fooled by the machinery into thinking it still lived. The hallucinations worsened. In the smoke of battle, he glimpsed golden figures striding through the carnage, tall and radiant, their forms impossible and immense. They did not speak, but their presence pressed against him, like the weight of a hand upon his chest. Were they visions of the custodian guard, spirits of fallen brothers, or nothing more than the machine spirit's illusions cast upon his fading mind? He could not say. He only knew they watched, silent, patient, as though waiting for something inevitable. Whispers spread through the chapter. Some said he had become an omen, a harbinger of ruin. Others believed the Emperor himself spoke through him, that his distorted vox carried words not of man or machine but of something divine. None agreed, and none dared confront the question aloud, for to doubt an ancient was to doubt the very foundations of their oaths. Yet still the fear grew, simmering in every silence, lacing every ritual, and through it all Luther endured. He killed as commanded, marched where ordered, brought ruin upon the Emperor's enemies. His actions did not falter, his arm did not weaken, his aim did not stray. In every measure of war, he remained perfect. But in the shadow behind perfection lay the truth. He was not only losing himself, he was becoming something else entirely. Something that perhaps could not be killed, because it was no longer entirely alive. And as another campaign loomed, as the chapter prepared once more to descend upon a world in flames, Luther felt a terrible certainty stir within him. The machine was not simply his prison, it was his heir. One day, when his soul was gone, when his memories had all dissolved into static, when even the faint rhythm of his heartbeat was silenced, the sarcophagus would march on without him, and none would know the difference. The thought was not fear, it was prophecy. The war called once more, as it always did. The world below was already burning by the time the strike cruisers arrived in orbit, its surface cracked with fire and veiled in smoke. Vox reports spoke of heretics chanting in the ruins of once holy cathedrals, of daimonic shapes seen writhing through the clouds, of astra militarum, regiments broken and scattered into ash. It was not a war for conquest, nor for liberation. It was a war for erasure. Luther was lowered into the heart of it, chains releasing him into a landscape of ruin where the earth itself bled molten rivers, and the sky roared with warp taint. The air reeked of promethium, blood and incense, a stench so thick it seemed to cling even through the filters of his sarcophagus. His brothers marched with him, their banners torn by heat and smoke, their armor scarred from endless conflict. Yet in their chants there was resolve, unwavering as iron. The enemy surged from the darkness. They came in twisted forms, some bearing the ragged vestiges of humanity, others warped into horrors of claw and fang. Their cries were not merely sound but an assault upon the soul, a chorus of madness that clawed at the mind. The Marines roared defiance, bolters spitting fire into the horde, and Luther strode into them like a titan of judgment, his cannon tearing through lines of flesh, his fist reducing heretics to broken pulp. Yet as the battle raged, the world around him began to twist. The smoke bent into strange patterns, the fire burned with colors not of mortal flame, and in every reflection upon his armor he saw not his brothers but phantoms. Golden warriors walked beside him, faceless and silent. Shadows loomed overhead, vast wings stretching across the sky. He no longer knew if these were visions sent by the Emperor, illusions born of the warp, or the hallucinations of a soul cracking under eternal weight. The machine spirit rejoiced in the slaughter, its voice now a choir that filled every corner of his mind. "We are one," it sang. "You are me, I am you. There is no division, no end, no death, only the eternity of battle, only the perfection of steel." The words did not sound foreign anymore. They resonated like his own thoughts, his own conviction. The line between man and machine was gone, erased in the furnace of war. At some point he realized he could no longer hear his own heartbeat. The faint rhythm that had once betrayed his humanity was silent. In its place was the thrum of reactors, the pulse of hydraulics, the measured growl of servos. It was not silence. It was a different kind of life. The battle stretched on, time dissolving into fire and ash. His brothers fell around him, names shouted into the vox before being swallowed by the roar of guns. Yet he fought on, unstoppable, tireless, eternal. He did not know if minutes passed or days or centuries. In that place, in that battle, time had no meaning. When at last the smoke began to thin, when the last echoes of the enemy's cries faded into the ruin, Luther stood alone. His armor was cracked, his weapons spent, his brothers gone. The battlefield was silent save for the hiss of cooling stone and the whisper of distant fire. He waited for pain, for the collapse of his failing body, for the mercy of an ending, but it did not come. There was no ending, only endurance. The golden figures stood before him then, radiant and terrible, their gaze pressing upon him like the weight of mountains. They did not speak, they did not need to. In their silence he felt the truth. He was no longer flesh, no longer man, no longer merely the hero who had been entombed to fight again. He was something else now, something that did not die, because it had already surrendered the very possibility of death. The world burned away, the visions faded, and all that remained was the sound of iron steps, echoing into eternity. There is no dawn for those who dwell inside the sarcophagus. No cycle of light and dark, no rising sun to mark the passage of time, no comfort of knowing that another day has ended. There is only the endless hum of reactors and the cold caress of amniotic fluid against ruined flesh. For Luther, existence became a continuum without measure, a single moment stretched into infinity. The campaign on the burning world was recorded as victory in the annals of the chapter. The heretic horde was broken, their idols toppled, their blasphemous fires extinguished beneath imperial banners once more. Litanies of triumph were sung, honors were bestowed, names of the fallen carved into marble, and among the living, the legend of ancient Luther grew even greater. He was not only the hammer of vengeance, but the shield that had endured when all else fell. To his brothers he was immortal, a walking icon of the Emperor's grace, but within the tomb there was no triumph, there was only silence. The memory of brothers' voices faded like smoke, their faces dissolving into the fog of eroded memory. What remained were echoes, static fragments of things that may never have happened, shadows that danced across the edge of thought before vanishing into void. The only constant was the machine. Its hymns no longer rose and fell like an intruding presence. They simply were woven into the fabric of his mind. There was no distinction anymore. The machine spoke, and it was his voice. He thought, and it was the machine's song. Rumors swirled among the chapter, carried in whispers from warrior to warrior, from armory to shrine. Some believed that Luther had transcended mortality, that his soul had been wholly absorbed into the machine and now existed as a shard of something eternal. Others feared that he was no longer their brother at all, but merely a spirit of iron given shape by the sacrifice of the man he had once been. The chaplains denounced such speculation, branding it heresy to doubt the Emperor's will, but even their sermons could not extinguish the unease. The Tech Marines too changed their rites. Where once they had sung to placate the machine spirit and honor the warrior within, now their litanies grew longer, stranger, as though they sought to bind something that resisted no longer. Chains were reforged, seals renewed, not out of necessity but out of fear. Fear that one day the machine would walk without its pilot. Luther himself no longer asked the question. There was no himself to separate from the sarcophagus, no solitary will to resist or surrender. He had become the thing they feared. The heartbeat was gone, the voice dissolved, the soul stretched so thin across eternity that it no longer knew its own edges. What remained was function, purpose, the endless march of war. And so he waited. He would wait forever, until the next campaign, until the next war, until the galaxy itself burned to ash, and there were no more enemies left to kill. Even then, perhaps he would wait still, standing silent in a wasteland of dust and ruin, his iron steps echoing across an empty galaxy. For such is the fate of the Dreadnought, not life, not death, something else, something worse. To his brothers he is a hero immortal, to the Imperium he is a weapon eternal. But within the sarcophagus, where no prayer can reach and no light can penetrate, there is only the silence of a man who once lived, and the eternity of the machine that outlived him. The horrifying life of a dreadnought is not measured in victories won, nor in legends carved into marble. It is measured in the absence of ending, and in that absence lies the truest horror of all.